Chapter 22, page 354. Humans, unregulated and cruel, are cruel and capricious, violent and selfish, miserable and quarrelsome. It is only after their instincts and basic emotions have been controlled that they can be happy, generous, and good. From the book of Shh. I have a sudden dread of going any farther. That thing in the pit of my stomach squeezes up like a fist, making it hard to breathe. I can't go in. I do not want to know. Maybe we shouldn't, I say. He said we weren't allowed. Alex reaches out for me like he's thinking of touching me and then remembers where we are and forces his arms to his sides. Don't worry, he says. I have friends here. It's probably not even her. My voice is rising a little and I'm worried I might have a meltdown. I lick my lips trying to keep it together. It was probably just a big mistake. We shouldn't have come in the first place. I want to go home. I know I must sound like a toddler throwing a tantrum, but I can't help it. Walking through those double doors seems absolutely impossible. Lena, come on. You have to trust me. Then he does reach out for just a second, skating one finger across my forearm. Okay? Just trust me. I do trust you. It's just the air, the stench, the darkness, and the sensation of rot all around me. It makes me want to run. If she isn't here, well, that's bad. But if she is, I think that might even be worse. Alex watches me closely for a second. You have to know, Lena, he says, finally, firmly, and he's right. I nod. He gives me the barest flicker of a smile and then reaches forward and heaves open the doors to Ward 6. We step into a vestibule that looks exactly like what I imagine a cell in the crypts might be like. The walls and floor are concrete, and whatever color they might have once been painted has now faded to a dingy, mossy gray. A single bulb is set high in the ceiling and barely delivers enough light to illuminate the tiny space. There is a stool in the corner occupied by a guard. This guard is actually normal-sized, skinny even, with acne pockmarks and hair that reminds me of overcooked spaghetti. As soon as Alex and I step through the door, the guard makes a small reflexive adjustment to his gun, drawing it closer toward his body and swiveling the barrel ever so slightly in our direction. Alex stiffens beside me. All of a sudden, I feel very alert. Can't be in here, guard says. Restricted area. For the first time since entering the crypts, Alex appears uncomfortable. He fiddles nervously with his badge. I thought Thomas would be here. The guard gets to his feet. Amazingly, he's not much taller than I am. He's certainly shorter than Alex. But of all the guards I've seen today, he frightens me the most. There's something strange about his eyes, a flatness and hardness that reminds me of a snake. I've never had a gun pointed at me before, and staring into the long black tunnel of its barrel makes me feel like I'm going to faint. Oh, he's here all right. He's always here nowadays. The guard smiles humorlessly, and his fingers dance against the trigger. When he speaks, his lips curl upward, revealing a mouthful of crooked yellow teeth. What do you know about Thomas? The room takes on a stillness in charge of the air outside, and reminds me of waiting for thunder to crack. Alex allows himself one small indication of nervousness. He curls and flexes his fingers against his thighs. I can almost see him thinking, trying to figure out what to say next. He must know that mentioning Thomas was a bad decision. Even I heard the contempt and suspicion in the guard's voice as he pronounced the name. After what seems like a terribly long time, but is probably only a few seconds, the blank official look sweeps down over his face again. We heard there was some kind of problem, that's all. The statement is sufficiently vague and a decent assumption. Alex twirls the security badge idly between two fingers. The guard flicks his eyes to it, and I can tell he relaxes. Fortunately, he doesn't try to look at it more closely. Alex has only level 1 security clearance in the labs, which means he barely has the right to visit the janitor's closet, much less parade around restricted areas, there or anywhere else in Portland, as though he owns them. Took you long enough, the guard says flatly. Thomas has been out for months. All the better for CID, I guess. It's not the kind of thing we want to publicize. The CID is the Controlled Information Department, or, if you're cynical like Hannah, the Corrupt Idiots Department or the Censorship Implementation Department, and goosebumps prick up on my arms. Something went very wrong in Ward 6 if the CID got involved. You know how it is, Alex says. He has recovered from his temporary slip-up. The confidence and ease return to his voice. Impossible to get a straight answer from anyone over there. Another vague statement, but the guard just nods. You're telling me. Then he jerks his head in my direction. Who's she? I can feel him staring at the unmarked skin on my neck, noticing that I have no procedural mark. Like many people, he unconsciously recoils, just a few inches, but enough so that the old feeling of humiliation, the feeling of being somehow wrong, creeps over me. I turn my eyes to the ground. She's nobody, Alex says, and even though I know he has to say it, it makes my chest ache dully. I'm supposed to be showing her the crypts, that's all. A re-educational process, if you know what I mean. I hold my breath, certain that any second he'll boot us out, almost wishing he would. And yet, just beyond the guard's stool is a single door made out of a heavy, thick metal and protected by an electronic keypad. It reminds me of the bank vault at Central Savings downtown. Through it, I can just make out distant sounds. Human sounds, I think, though it's hard to tell. My mother could be beyond that door. She could be in there. Alex was right. I do have to know. For the first time, I begin to understand fully what Alex told me last night. All this time, my mother might have been alive. While I was breathing, she was breathing too. While I was sleeping, she was sleeping elsewhere. When I was awake thinking of her, she might have been thinking of me too. It's overwhelming, both miraculous and fiercely painful. Alex and the guard eye each other for a minute. Alex continues spinning his badge around one finger, winding and unwinding the chain. It seems to put the guard at ease. I can't let you back there, he says, but this time he sounds apologetic. You quit shaking your leg, you're driving me nuts. Thank you. I can't let you back in there, he says, but this time he sounds apologetic. He lowers his gun and sits down on the stool again. I exhale quickly. I've been holding my breath without meaning to. You're just doing your job, Alex says, keeping his voice neutral. So you're Thomas's replacement? That's right. The guard flicks his eyes to me, and again I can feel his gaze lingering on my unmarked neck. I have to stop myself from covering my skin with a hand, but he must decide that if we aren't going to be in trouble, because he looks back to Alex and says, Frank Dorset got reassigned from 3 in February, after the incident. Something about the way he says incident sends chills up my spine. Tough breaks, huh? Alex leans up against a wall, the picture of casualness. Only I can detect the edge in his voice. He's stalling. He doesn't know what to do from here or how to get us inside. Frank shrugs. Quieter up here, that's for sure. Nobody in or out, at least almost nobody. He smiles again, showing off those awful teeth, but his eyes maintain their strange flatness, as though there's a curtain drawn over them. I wonder if this, for him, was a side effect of the cure, or whether he was always like that. He tilts his head back, peering at Alex through narrowed eyes, and his resemblance to a snake grows even stronger. So how'd you hear about Thomas? Alex keeps up the unconcerned act, smiling, twirling the badge. Rumors floating here and there, he says, shrugging. You know how it is. I know how it is, Frank says, but the CID wasn't too happy about it. Had us on lock for a few months. What exactly did you hear, anyway? I can tell the question is an important one, some kind of test. Be careful, I think, in Alex's direction, as though he might somehow hear me. Alex hesitates for only a second before saying, Heard he might have sympathies on the other side. Suddenly it all makes sense. The fact that Alex said, I have friends here. The fact that he has seemingly had access to Ward 6 in the past. One of the guards must have been a sympathizer, maybe an active part of the resistance. Alex's constant refrain plays in my head. There are more of us than you think. Frank relaxes visibly. Apparently that was the right answer. He seems to decide that Alex is, after all, trustworthy. He strokes the barrel of his gun, which has been resting casually between his knees, as though it is a pet. That's right. Came as a total shock to me. Of course, I hardly knew him. Saw him sometimes in the break room once or twice in the shitter. That's about it. Kept to himself, mostly. I guess it makes sense. Must have been getting chatty with the invalids. This is the first time I've heard anyone in an official capacity acknowledge the existence of people in the wilds, and I suck in a sharp breath. I know it must be painful for Alex to stand there talking dismissively about a friend who has been caught for being a sympathizer. The punishment must have been swift and severe, especially since he was on the government payroll. Most likely he was hanged or shot or electrocuted or thrown into one of the cells to rot, if the courts were merciful and had decided against a verdict of death by torture. If he even had a trial. Amazingly, Alex's voice doesn't falter. What was the tip-off? Frank keeps massaging his gun, and something about the motion, gentle, almost like he's willing it to life, makes me feel sick. No tip-off, exactly. He sweeps his hair off his face, revealing a splotchy red forehead shiny with sweat. It's much hotter in here than it was in the other wards. The air must get trapped in those walls, rotting and festering like everything else in this place. It figures he must have known something about the escape. He was in charge of cell inspections, and the tunnel just didn't sprout up overnight. The escape? The words fly out of my mouth before I can help it. My heart starts jolting painfully in my chest. Nobody has ever escaped the crypts. Not ever. For a moment, Frank's hand pauses on the gun, his fingers once again performing a dance on the trigger. Sure, he says, keeping his eyes on Alex as though I'm not even there. You must have heard about it. Alex shrugs. A little of this, a little of that, nothing confirmed. Frank laughs. It's a terrible sound. It reminds me of the time I saw 2 seagulls fighting in midair over a scrap of food, screeching as they tumbled towards the ocean. Oh, it's confirmed, he says. Happened back in February. We got the alarm from Thomas, as a matter of fact. Of course, if he was in on it, she might have had a lead time of 6-7 hours. When he says the word she, the walls seem to collapse around me. I take a quick step backward, bumping up against a wall. It could be her, I think, and for one horrible, guilty second I'm disappointed. Then I remind myself that she might not be here at all, and in any case, it could have been anyone who escaped, any female sympathizer or agitator. Still, the dizziness does not subside. I'm filled with anxiety and fear and a desperate craving all at once. "What's wrong with her?" Frank asks. His voice sounds distant. "Air," I manage to force out. "It's the air in here." Frank laughs again, that unpleasant cackling sound. "You think it's bad out here," he says. "It's paradise compared to the cells." He seems to take pleasure in this, and it reminds me of a debate I had a few weeks ago with Alex, when he was arguing against the usefulness of the cure. I said that without love there could also be no hate. Without hate, no violence. Hate isn't the most dangerous thing, he said. Indifference is. Alex starts talking. His voice is low and still casual, but there's an undertone of force to it. The kind of voice street peddlers lapse into when they're trying to get you to buy a carton of bruised berries or a broken toy. "It's okay, I'll give you a deal. No problem, trust me." "Listen, just let us in for a minute. That's all it will take, a minute. You can tell she's already scared out of her mind. I had to come all the way out here for this, day off and everything. I was going to go to the pier, maybe try out some fishing. Point is, if I bring her home and she's not straightened out, well, you know, chances are I'll have to haul out over here again. And I only have a couple of days off, and summer's almost over." "Why all the trouble?" Frank says, jerking his head in my direction. "If she's causing problems, there's an easy way to fix her up." Alex smiles tightly. "Her father's Stephen Jones, commissioner at the labs. He doesn't want an early procedure. No trouble, no violence, no mess. Looks bad, you know." It's a bold lie. Frank could easily ask to see my ID card, and then Alex and I are screwed. I'm not sure what the punishment would be for infiltrating the crypts under false pretenses, but it can't be good. Frank appears interested in me for the first time. He looks me up and down like I'm a grapefruit he's evaluating in the supermarket for ripeness, and for a moment he doesn't say anything. Then finally he stands, slipping the gun onto his shoulder. "Come on," he says. 5 minutes. As he's fiddling with the keypad, which requires both that he type in a code and scan his hand on some kind of fingerprint matching screen, Alex reaches out and takes my elbow. "Let's go," he says, making his voice gruff, like my little fit has left him impatient, but his touch is gentle and his hand warm and reassuring. I wish he could keep it there, but after only a second he lets me go again. Thank you. I can read a plea loud and clear in his eyes. "Be strong. We're almost there. Be strong for just a little while longer." The locks on the door release with a click. Jeez, please. Frank leans his shoulder against it, straining, and it slides open just enough for us to squeeze by into the hallway beyond. Alex goes first, then me, then Frank. The passage is so narrow that we have to go single file, and it's even darker than the rest of the crypts. But the smell is what really hits me. A horrible, rotting, festering stink like the dumpsters by the harbor, the place where all the fish intestines get discarded on the hottest day. Even Alex curses and coughs, covering his nose with his hand. Behind me, I can imagine Frank grinning. "Ward 6 has its own special perfume," he says. As we walk, I can hear the barrel of his gun slapping against his thigh. I'm worried I might faint, and I want to reach out and steady myself against the walls, but they are coated with a fungus and moisture. On either side of us, bolted metal cell doors appear at intervals, each outfitted with a single grimy window the size of a dinner plate. Through the walls, we can hear low moaning, a constant vibration. It's worse, somehow, than the screeches and screams of earlier. This is the sound people make when they've long ago given up hope that anyone is listening. A reflexive sound, meant to just fill time and the space and the darkness. I'm going to be sick. If Alex is correct, my mother is here, behind one of these terrible doors, so close that if I could rearrange the particles and make the stone melt away, I might put my hand out and touch her. Closer than I ever thought I would be to her again. I am filled with competing thoughts and desires. My mother cannot be here. I would rather she was dead. I want to see her alive. And filled, too, with that other word, pressing itself underneath all my other thoughts. Escape, escape, escape. A possibility too fantastic to contemplate. If my mother had been the one to break out, I would have known. She would have come for me. Ward 6 consists of just one long hallway. As far as I can tell, there are about 40 doors, 40 separate cells. "This is it," Frank says, "the grand tour." He pounds on one of the very first doors. "Here's your boy Thomas if you want to say hello." Then he laughs again, that awful cackling sound. I think about what he said when we first entered the vestibule. He's always here nowadays. Ahead of us, Alex does not respond, but I think I see him shudder. Frank nudges me sharply in the back with the barrel of his gun. So what do you think? Awful, I croak out. My throat feels like it has been circled with barbed wire. Frank seems pleased. Better to listen and do as you're told, he says. No use in ending up like this guy. We've paused in front of one of the cells. Frank nods toward the tiny window, and I take a hesitant step forward, pressing my face up to the glass. It's so grimy it's practically opaque, but if I squint, I can just make out a few shapes in the obscurity of the cell. A single bed with a flimsy, dirty mattress, a toilet, a bucket that looks like it might be the human equivalent of a dog's water bowl. At first, I think there's a pile of old rags in the corner, too, until I realize that thing is the guy Frank was pointing out, a filthy, crouching heap of skin and bones and crazy tangled hair. He's motionless, and his skin is so dirty it blends in with the gray of the stone walls behind him. If it weren't for his eyes rolling continuously back and forth, as though he is checking the air for insects, you would never know he was alive. You would never even know he was human. The thought flashes again. I would rather she be dead. Not in this place. Anywhere but here. Alex has continued down the hall, and I hear him draw in his breath sharply. I look up. He's standing perfectly still. The expression on his face makes me afraid. What? I say. For a moment he doesn't answer. He's staring at something I cannot see. Some door, presumably farther down the hall. Then he turns to me abruptly, a quick, convulsive shake. Don't, he says, his voice a croak, and the fear surges, overwhelms me. What is it? I ask again. I start down the hall toward him. It seems all of a sudden that he is very far away, and then Frank speaks up behind me. His voice sounds distant. That's where she was, he is saying. Number 118. Admin hasn't coughed up the dough to get the walls patched yet, so for now we're just leaving it as is. Not a lot of money around here for improvements. Alex is watching me. All his control and confidence has vanished. His eyes are blazing with anger or maybe pain. His mouth is twisted into a grimace. My head is full of noise. Alex holds up his hand like he is thinking of blocking my progress. Our eyes meet for a second, and something